Chapter 526. Your Excellency, if I may ask. Taking a knee on the ground before Duke Azanek, the demon paused halfway through his sentence, waiting for the Duke's confirmation. He got it soon enough. You may ask. Thank you. The servant thanked the Duke. Secretly, he tried his best to stop himself from smiling. As expected of the Duke, he does not suspect anything. In reality, he wasn't merely asking out of curiosity. He was asking so that he could report what was going to the other Duke. It was a secret order that he had received before he had left. By doing this, he was treading a thin line, but as soon as he remembered the rewards promised to him by the other Duke, all of his fear dissipated. It was simply too tempting. With his head lowered, he proceeded to ask something that he had been curious about. Why did you tell that human to keep the Overlord alive? It was well known that the current Overlord was close to breaking through to the next level. What the servant was curious about was why the Duke didn't have any intentions of killing him directly. His question was answered not long after. It's because I'm planning on giving him a contract. Upon hearing those words, the servant looked surprised. But it soon replaced it with a look of understanding. Understood, Your Excellency. Everything quickly puzzled itself together inside of the servant's mind as he made sure to remember everything. The Duke's plan was rather simple. He was planning on taking the Blood Prince to his side. Everything was starting to make sense to the demon as he came up with one conclusion. He wants to be the sole owner of the arena. In spite of this, he immediately began to sweat profusely after coming to such a conclusion. His command over the Blood Prince would inevitably give him more power than the other Duke, thus forcing him to give him control over the arena. As his thoughts paused there, the demon felt cold chills run down his spine. As expected of Duke Azanek, ruthless as ever. Unfortunately for the Duke, what he didn't know was that the demon he shared this information with worked for the other Duke. He was simply crippling himself. Do you have any other questions to ask? Jolting him out of his thoughts was the Duke's voice that reverberated throughout the whole room. Lowering his head further, the servant quickly shook his head. No, Your Excellency. This is enough. The Duke will certainly reward me after I tell him this. Thinking such thoughts, he tried his best to suppress his excitement. Good. But it was then that a powerful force suddenly permeated the air, causing the servant to feel a rush of energy. Ugh. With a pained groan, he suddenly found himself stuck on the ground, unable to lift his head due to the sheer pressure that was bearing down on him from above. What? As he had difficulty breathing, the servant murmured in distress. Why are you doing this to me? Responding to him, the Duke's cold voice echoed throughout the room. Did you think for a second that you would live after hearing what I said just now? The servant's eyes opened up. He knew. How was this possible? He had taken all possible precautions to hide this fact. How was it possible for the Duke to know this? Your Excellency! He screamed. I won't tell anyone. You've grown a little impudent recently, haven't you? Asking me this and that, you think I don't know? The Duke's face sunk as the pressure coming out of his body rose even more, rendering the servant helpless. He could only lay down on the ground, like a helpless prey that had been caught by its predator. Opening his mouth, he tried to beg his case. But it didn't seem as though the Duke was interested, as he long stopped looking at him. Regardless, the servant continued begging. Your Excellency, please, I can exp. Enough. I won't kill you now. After hearing those words, the servant's face relaxed a bit. But that didn't last for long, as his face hardened completely not long after. If I kill you now, that bastard will find out that something is wrong. At the same time, this is not bad. Gazing at the room in front of me, I looked around the place. Among the many decorations in the room before me, it had a bed big enough for me to fit in, sofas, paintings, and all types of decorations. This was my new room. It should have been given to me before, but it was only now that they had decided to give it to me. Quite the lazy bunch. The first thing I did upon entering my room was head straight for the bed. Of course, as I did, I made sure to keep note of every little detail of the room. This place is probably heavily surveilled, so I need to keep low for now. The leak in the conversation I had with Silvermoon not too long ago was confirmation of this. Fortunately for me, I had done most of my preparations beforehand. All I had to do was carry them out at the moment. The most up-to-date NOV_scrolls are published under freelworld.com. Just a little bit more. Upon laying down on the bed and covering my eyes with my arm, I slowly started to relax. It would have been normal for me to start training at this point, but since I had forced my way to rank, I needed time to stabilize my body. One couldn't just force a breakthrough and expect their bodies to be okay with it. The only reason why I was mostly okay was because of my constitution, which had changed due to the seed of limit. Had it been anyone else, they would have been in a tougher spot. As I relaxed on the bed with my arm covering my face, I thought of something. I should also be going to get my resources. A fundamental rule of the arena was that the winner would take all of the loser's possessions, including their resources. It essentially crippled the loser of the fight, but these were the rules. On another note, despite taking other contestants' resources, I found most of them to be useless. And if I had to be honest, I really didn't hold any interest in any of their resources. Having just consumed some, my body couldn't keep up. It would probably be quite a while since I would be able to use resources to once again break through. Oh well. I was still planning on collecting Lightning Dragon's resources. It wasn't because I wanted them, but because I wanted to meet him. There were a couple of things that I needed to say to him. A couple of very important things. Should I or should I not? Biting his nails, Kevin gazed at the phone in his hands. He was currently in a tough predicament. As he held the phone with one hand, staring at himself reflected on the screen, Kevin's thumb hovered over a small green button on the screen. You have to look through the rain to see the rainbow. I have a feeling that things won't go well if I send this. Kevin began to fear each and every new post he sent as he recalled his past incident with Ren. Go away, don't talk to me, what is this cringe? Blocked. Ugh. Kevin let out a distressed sound. Damn it, Ren. In the first place, he couldn't be blamed for sending his previous post. Each time he posted something on the web, he would receive a lot of money. Like a lot of money. At least a couple million U per post. This was only to be expected. With the amount of fame he had due to his past achievements, he had a lot of followers. And they were growing each and every day. He had almost reached a point where he had more followers than most high-profile celebrities. And it was only natural for him to get sponsorship and endorsement deals from famous brands. Given how much money resources cost him, it wasn't something he could give up so easily. Furthermore, as he was always busy rather than handling these sorts of things himself, he decided to hire someone to do it for him. Ugh. Checking his post one more time, Kevin's face distorted. You have to look through the rain to see the rainbow. Especially with the new quote. He wasn't sure whether it would be good or not. But just thinking of Ren possibly coming back and making fun of him again. Yeah, let's not. He quickly closed his phone and put it away. No matter how much money he was going to lose, he was not going to repeat the same mistake again. Never. As he raised his hand, he wiped away the corner of his eyes. It was a bit itchy. Pie money. Itchy. Letting out a long and exhausted sigh, Kevin waved his hand in the air. A series of texts formed in front of him. Tracing his hand over the text, it soon paused on a specific mission. There doesn't seem to be a time limit, but I should hurry up. Lowering his hand, he fell into thought as he muttered. I've already broken through to rank, so all I have to do is wait for Ren to come back. But when exactly is that going to be? Had it not been for the people vouching for him, Kevin would have already gone out to look for him after almost 5 months of him going missing. That said, it wasn't like he had spent the past 5 months doing nothing. In fact, Kevin had been busier than he had ever been in the past. Especially with everything that was going on at the Union at the moment. In addition to diving into dungeons almost every day, he had also met several high-ranking demons along the way, forcing him to fight them with his life on the line. They were pretty big incidents that were reported all over the human domain. Several scars still adorned his body, reminding him of his experiences. I should probably have them healed before Emma comes back. Regarding Emma, it had been quite some time since he last saw her, and if it hadn't been for her father personally assuring him that she was fine, Kevin would have already panicked. That wasn't exactly the only reason. After having had a long conversation with her a while back, Kevin understood that whatever Emma was doing, it was for the sake of improving herself. Although she didn't say it outright, Kevin knew that she didn't want to be seen as a burden, or some precious vase that needed to be protected by everyone. She too had her own pride, and Kevin respected that. What time is it? Jolting himself out of his thoughts, Kevin suddenly checked the time. 6:30 a.m. Shit, I'm late for class. Hurrying out of his room, Kevin took his jacket and put it on. In addition to him working with the Union, Kevin was in fact still a professor at the Lock. That had not changed. He did get an offer to quit, but he had refused. He actually quite enjoyed teaching. Well, for the most part. Chapter 527. This works better. Are you sure? If you want to deal the most amount of damage, yes. This is the best way. Okay. Things seemed to be rather tense inside of a fairly sized office space, as two figures sat on opposite ends of each other. What about with this one? Would a guild war be more suitable, or should we cripple them financially? Guild war? That sounds rather fun. It might backfire. I don't think it will. You can just ask Kevin to help you out. I'm sure he wouldn't have a problem doing so. He's a pushover. Furthermore, you yourself told me that you had to have them gone. True. In this unusual atmosphere, the words that were being spoken between the two individuals would have sent waves around the human domain. It was then that. Knock. Knock. The door suddenly knocked, and a deep voice echoed from the other side of the door. Young miss, may I come in? Yes. Amanda replied. Following this, the door opened up and a young man in his 30s walked into the room. He was Maxwell, Amanda's assistant. The moment Amanda's eyes laid on him, she curiously asked, "What brings you here?" "Nothing in particular, young miss." He curiously looked around the room before his eyes paused on the figure sitting next to Amanda. Despite the slight twitch in his mouth as he paused to look at the figure, he quickly continued speaking. "The elders wanted to know whether you have come up with a solution for our current predicament." About that. Amanda turned her head to glance at a girl who was sitting next to her. Other than Melissa, who else could it have been? Only she would say such words. Well, there was Ren, but he wasn't exactly here. Lifting her glasses up with her finger, Melissa didn't reply and scanned the map of Ashton City with her eyes. Then, taking her gaze away from the map, she responded. "Your best bet would be to financially cripple Dongtan Guild, Icarian Guild and Snowstar Guild. In terms of finance, they are the weakest of the lot, and will go down without putting up much of a fight." "I thought so too." A nod followed Amanda's response as she pointed at two more guilds. Regarding these two guilds, Wraithless and Golden Crow would be the best to announce a guild war against. They have the financial power, but are not as strong in terms of members. "I agree, that's your best bet," Melissa replied with a serious look. There was a glint of excitement in her eyes as she gazed at the map. "My only gripe with this is that they might hire external help to fight in the guild wars. That in itself will be a disadvantage." "I agree." Amanda's eyes narrowed. Her brows relaxed not long after. "But I think this can work for our advantage." "It might." In agreement, Melissa plucked lightly at her lips. "Especially since they will be individuals that have never worked with each other before." "Yes." One of the most important factors for ensuring victory in a guild war was coordination and seamless collaboration between all participants. It wasn't a 1v1 scenario. It was a large-scale battle that involved thousands and thousands of individuals. By hiring external help, they would essentially be giving up control. In particular, this was more pronounced when one hired stronger support. Consequently, the stronger they were, the more arrogant they were, making them harder to control. And this was a serious problem when guilds hired external help. They were, in other words, a double-edged sword. Hee hee. A sudden giggle escaped Melissa's lips. "This is fun." Thinking about how many diamond-graded guilds might potentially fall from their plans, Melissa just couldn't help herself. The money that would come from their victory. A broad grin spread across her face. In the meantime, turning her head, Amanda glanced her way. Her face turned odd. She then asked, "Why are you laughing?" "Nothing much." Melissa waved it off. But the smile on her face said otherwise. Eventually, under Amanda's gaze, Melissa came clean. "All right, I'm just laughing because this is fun." "Fun?" "Yeah." Melissa's smile deepened. Adjusting the glasses on her face once more, she pressed one of the guilds on the map with her hands. "Destroying guilds and all. This is a lot more entertaining than I originally thought. Kind of relieves me from a lot of stress." As a result of everything that had happened with the magic cards recently, Melissa was overworked and stressed beyond belief. In the absence of Amanda's call, she probably would have spent the day in the lab doing the same repetitive tasks. To put it simply, it was boring. It got so boring that Melissa increased her potions consumption during that time. Fortunately, Amanda had called her. It was nice to have a change of pace occasionally. "I see. It took Amanda some time to reply. The look on her face as she gazed at Melissa was still odd. Melissa's cocked her head a little. What's wrong? The way Amanda was staring at her made her feel weird. What's wrong with her? It was then that Amanda spoke. Her next words caused Melissa's face to harden. It's just that you reminded me of Ren when you were talking about destroying the guilds. Wah, T. With her mouth agape, Melissa's body started to shake. Did she just say what I think she just said? Staring at the map in front of her, Melissa had a sudden urge to destroy even more. I remind her of him? Hell no. This was her worst nightmare. Her eyes eventually narrowed tightly as her teeth clenched. Out of all the people you had to compare me to, you chose him? Sorry. Amanda apologized. That said, she didn't seem to be sorry at all. Rather, she had a look filled with pity. Melissa's fist clenched. Thanks for ruining my mood. Slapping the table, Melissa took out a potion. Gulp. Carefully staring at it, there was an audible gulp in the room. Shit, I just took it out of habit. Clenching the potion tightly, Melissa grit her teeth as she forced herself to put the potion away. She had promised herself to control her potion's intake. Standing up, she forced a smile. Amanda, if you ever plan on doing something as fun like this again, do call me. I will come in a heartbeat. Turning around, Melissa glanced in Maxwell's way before heading for the door. Seriously. Along the way, she whispered in a barely audible voice. She was clearly still salty about Amanda's words. If it was someone who copied someone, it would have been him copying me. In the first place, I'm the one with the twisted personality. In spite of the whispers, Amanda still heard every one of her words. At least she knows. Scratching the side of her cheek, Amanda's eyes lingered toward the area Melissa previously stood. She then shook her head and glanced in Maxwell's way. You've heard everything. You can report this to the elders. Report to me whether they approve of my arrangements or not. Understood. Maxwell bowed down politely. As Maxwell was about to leave, he thought of something and called Amanda. Young miss. Yes. Scratching the tip of his nose, a faint smile spread across his face. I couldn't help but overhear the conversation between the two of you, and I just wanted to add something. Halfway through his sentence, Amanda's head cocked a little as her delicate brow raised. What is it? Both of you had the same look on your faces when I entered the room. Amanda's face stiffened. But Maxwell had already left before she could ask him to elaborate. With the sound of the door closing, silence enveloped the room. Caught off guard, Amanda didn't know how to reply as she touched her lips and muttered. Did I really look like him? Honestly, she had mixed feelings about this. Especially since this was one of his weirdest traits. Echi. With a long, tired sigh, Amanda opened the drawer next to her and pulled out a small, glowing orb. Leaning back in her chair, she gazed at the ceiling while whispering to herself. Father, how are you doing? And the winner of this match is White Reaper, who is now ineligible to fight against the current overlord. Hearing the demonist's voice, I turned my gaze away from the crowd before staring at a figure in the distance. It was my opponent. Upon making sure that he was done for, I proceeded to head back to my room. As a result of beating Lightning Dragon and Silver Moon forfeiting, I became the Duke Bracket's Emperor. In addition, I had just defeated the King Bracket's current Emperor, qualifying me to fight the Overlord. The Blood Prince. The battle was hard fought, but I inevitably became the winner. If I had to be honest, fighting against the King Bracket Emperor was a lot easier than Lightning Dragon. Lightning Dragon was just a force of nature. The strength with which he had fought left me shaken even now. Regardless, Lightning Dragon aside, it would soon be my turn to take on the current Overlord. Edward. The plan was of course for me to win. This was a must. Only by beating can I fight against the Duke. I knew better than anyone else that the Duke's rank would not be suppressed during the fight, even though the Duke should theoretically have his rank suppressed. Congratulations on your victory. Entering the arena tunnel, I was greeted by a familiar figure. It was Edward. My eyes narrowed immediately as soon as I spotted him. What do you want? I asked in a rather cold voice. Of course, this was merely acting on my part. With a shrug of his shoulders, Edward glanced my way. I was just congratulating you on your victory. Oh, you only care about that now? What about when I first visited you? A smirk slowly pulled on my lips. Don't tell me that you're only visiting me now because you're afraid. Drawing closer, my voice deepened. Afraid of me possibly beating you? Gotta say, I can probably make a good villain. I thought as I continued spewing third-rate villain quotes. For the sake of it, I threw whatever I could think of. Wash your neck. Edward's face changed at my words. I only respect the strong. I don't respect cowardly people who want to leech off of me. That's why I kicked you out. He's not bad either. His quotes were rather cheesy, but this was exactly what I was aiming for as I spat toward my right. Courting death. Scoffing at him, I took a couple of steps forward before placing my hand over his shoulder. Firmly gripping his shoulder, I hatefully spat. For your sake, when the two of us meet in the arena, you better lose. I don't want to kill you. Just as I began to say the first part of the sentence, I made sure to apply more pressure to my index finger. I was trying to convey to him the hidden meaning in my words. You better lose. Smack. After smacking my hand away, Edward subtly nodded his head and glared at me coldly. Looks like I was mistaken about you. Before I could say anything else, he directly turned around and left, seemingly having lost all interest in me. Just you wait. I spat through my gnashed teeth as I glared in Edward's direction. Chapter 528. Inside the tunnel leading to the arena, a soft and groggy voice echoed. Are you ready? The voice came from Silvermoon, who was checking on me. Her face had become quite sunken since the last time I had seen her, and she also didn't seem to be in the right state of mind. She was clearly still unable to cope with the loss of Sylvestar. She was essentially a dead woman walking. The only reason she was here was to see my fight against Edward, the man that took her husband's life. As I stepped away from her, I could hear the crowd's loud cheers behind me. Without turning around, I replied, You don't have to worry about that. I will win the fight. I wasn't lying about this. I wasn't going to lose the fight. In the wake of my meeting with Edward, it was now my turn to face him. There was already a palpable excitement in the crowd's cheers, which were getting louder by the minute. The atmosphere around me was boiling. In the meantime, Silvermoon, who was standing beside me, also sensed the weird atmosphere and took a step back. Hey, I've already helped you the best way I could. I hope you can keep your promise. You can count on that. It was at that moment. The gates of the arena started to slowly open up, revealing the vast arena in the distance. The crowd cheers intensified and my shoulders relaxed. Here goes nothing. Taking a deep breath, I took a step into the arena. I don't know how to feel about this. Despite the passive face he wore, Edward's thoughts were complicated as he stood in the middle of the arena. Having spoken with him yesterday, he understood what the outcome of today's match would be. His inevitable loss. But there were two problems with this. One, he had to lose believably. Everything they had been working on would go up in smoke if he lost in an obvious manner. But for this part, he wasn't too worried. Considering his strength, he does indeed have a chance of beating me. Especially if he has that device. His eyes paused on the bracelet in his hand. Rin would have an easier time winning if he had a device to turn off his suppressor. Even then, that wasn't what worried Edward. I'm still on the fence about this. What worried him was how trustworthy he was. He had only met him once in his life and he didn't know him well. Although he probably saved me from losing to Sylvestar, I still don't trust him completely. Edward couldn't be blamed for this. Having spent as much time as he did in the arena and demon realm, he had long lost the ability to trust anyone easily. Had Rin not revealed who he was, Edward would have probably ignored his words. Furthermore, the strength he displayed really shocked him. And this was a point of concern for him. Just how much can a person change in such little time? He really was completely different from the person he had once met in the past. Was he really someone he could trust? But I don't really have a choice. A bitter smile spread across Edward's face as he thought of his other choices. In light of his realization that the games were rigged, Edward knew that he could only play along with whatever he was planning. He was going to lose either way, so he may as well just bet everything he had on the possibility that brought him the highest chance of escaping. He simply didn't have a choice. In that moment, the gates on the other side of the arena opened and a familiar figure emerged. An expression of calm, devoid of any emotions, was accompanied by white hair and two eyes of deep blue color. White Reaper, or Rin, finally came out to the arena. The calm echo of his footsteps filled the entire arena as he walked toward him. There was an immediate pause in everyone's gaze as he walked in Edward's direction. Heavy tension descended down the arena. White Reaper's footsteps soon stopped in front of Edward and their eyes met. Staring back into them, Edward slowly closed his eyes. Whatever was around him, whether it was the crowd or the noise coming from them, immediately disappeared as soon as he closed his eyes. At that very moment in his mind, there was only an image of Rune standing opposite him. He could also feel a faint presence standing next to him. In the moment he was only focused on studying his opponent opposite him as no other sound entered his ears. He could also feel the presence of someone else, but he made sure to pay no mind to it. It was probably the demoness who always appeared at the beginning of the match. Extending his hand, a blood-red spear materialized in his hands. A powerful red glow enveloped the spear as he tightly grasped it with both hands, all the mana inside of him bursting out like a broken dam. Taking a deep breath, he slowly took a stance and opened his eyes again. A moment later his gaze met Ren's. While their eyes met, Ren similarly took a stance and placed his right hand over his sword's hilt. A surge of powerful mana erupted from out of his body. Even if I do end up losing, I should do a good job at making it look like I put up a good fight, Edward thought to himself as he focused all of his mana toward the tip of his spear. You may fight. It was at that moment that the demoness' voice echoed out. Edward was quick to take action. The moment he heard the demoness' voice, he took a step forward and mercilessly thrust his spear in Ren's direction. From the spear, a blood-red wave resembling a small tsunami erupted, before quickly heading in Ren's direction. At the same time he stabbed his spear, he heard a subtle clicking sound coming from Ren's direction. Fast, Edward thought as he found Ren's sword already reaching out for him. It was at that moment that Edward realized that his attack wouldn't make it before Ren's sword would reach him. Cage. Gritting his teeth, Edward twisted his torso and moved the spear shaft toward his right side. A loud metallic ring echoed throughout the whole arena as Ren's sword came into contact with Edward's spear. From the point of contact between the two weapons, circular pressurized wind gales were released, spreading out throughout the whole arena. But it was then that Ren did something completely out of Edward's expectations. With his sword still pushing against Edward's spear, Ren's back arched and he punched out toward Edward's direction using his left hand. What in the... It was clear that Ren's actions confused Edward, who had originally thought that Ren was going to fight him with a sword, but despite his surprise he reacted quickly by raising his free hand. But right as he was about to move his arm he felt something hard press against his arm. It was a small translucent ring. When did that get there? Edward's eyes opened a little as he grit his teeth and exerted more force on his arm, finally breaking through the ring and placing his arm next to his face. Bang! Upon making contact with Ren's fist, Edward was pushed a couple of steps back. Before he could stabilize his body, Ren had already reached him. Raising his fist he punched out again. As he punched, a thin green veil of mana covered his fist, allowing him to break through the sound barrier. Bang! His fist was followed by several rings bursting from behind him as he struck out. Unable to use his spear due to his awkward positioning, Edward could only use the shaft of his spear to block the punch. Edward's movements were slightly hindered as 4 rings formed on each end of the spear precisely when he tried to block the attack. Keish. It was only a slight hindrance, but it was enough for Ren to take advantage and land a clean hit on Edward. Bang! The moment Ren's fist connected with Edward's face, Edward found his body getting pushed back. Again. But before his body could be pushed he felt something press against his back. He didn't even need to look to understand what it was. It was another darned ring. Ren's figure appeared before him. More and more rings appeared from behind him as they hovered around his fist. Bang! Bang! From that moment, all the crowd could do was watch as Ren's fist continuously punched Edward in every part of his body. With every one of his actions getting blocked by one of his rings, Edward could only watch as Ren's fist continued to connect with his face and body. Although they didn't particularly hurt too much, the damage was slowly starting to accumulate and so was Edward's annoyance. Hup! Letting out a short cry, a wave of powerful mana suddenly erupted from out of his body, completely enveloping the arena. As a result of his sudden actions, Ren was forced to take a couple of steps back. Glaring in his direction, Edward massaged his right cheek. Firmly gripping the shaft of the spear, Edward took a step forward and took a deep breath. Hoo! While calming down his mind, he focused on drawing the mana of his body toward the tip of his spear as a terrifying bloodlust surged from him, enveloping the arena. The moment Edward released his bloodthirst, Ren's face turned extremely solemn. However, if one looked closely, they'd be able to notice a subtle smirk on his face. He slowly took a stance and a powerful wave of mana also started to erupt out of his body. Although it wasn't as powerful and dense as Edward's, it was still noticeable to the crowd. "You've got to be shitting me." Edward also noticed this as his shoulders almost dropped on the spot. Of course, he could only curse inwardly as his face remained as serious as ever on the outside. Grasping the shaft of his spear with all of his strength, Edward slowly thrusted it in Ren's direction. His movements caused a large blood-red funnel to form at the tip of his spear, sucking all the mana that was in the air. There was a noticeable brightening of the glow surrounding the spear. At the same time this was happening, Ren's face, which was as serious as it could have ever been, twitched as he pulled away at his sword. Different lines formed in the air and the ground began to split. Edward, who was standing not too far from Ren, felt needle-like stings start all over his body as the air around him distorted. Although the pain wasn't too intense, it still made his subsequent movements more difficult. Even so, he slowly released every ounce of mana he had accumulated inside his spear, and shot it towards Ren. Just as all the mana inside his body was about to escape through his spear, he felt a bolt of electricity come from the right side of his hand, where the suppressor was, and he quickly lost contact with his mana. Although Edward's slip of mana was only momentary, the result was disastrous as he suddenly found this accumulated mana running rampant, resulting in his spear shaking uncontrollably. In an instant, most of the mana he had accumulated for his spear dissipated, and a thunderous noise filled the arena. Boom. Chapter 529. My eyes were glued to Edward's body, which was lying on the ground. In my ears, the noise from the crowd was drowned out. During that moment, I had all my attention focused on Edward. It wasn't until I saw his chest move that I finally relaxed. He was still alive. As he lay on the ground with his eyes wide open, staring at the red sky of the arena, his body was anything but fine. Taking a deep breath and inwardly praying, I put the device back in my dimensional space and closed my eyes. I hope Amanda does not find out about this. If she found out I beat up her father. Shivers ran down my spine. Yeah, let's hope that does not happen. What Demon King? She would probably finish me before that happened. Well, I didn't think she would go that far, but I still didn't care to find out what would happen. Keeping this secret under the grave was a sacred duty. Ha! I exhaled and slowly opened my eyes. As I opened my eyes again, I felt everyone's gaze pause on me. A pin-drop silence filled the arena grounds as none of the spectators spoke. I then glanced toward the right. Nevertheless, I was surprised to find that the demoness had not appeared yet. She was usually punctual. Where is she? I wondered to myself as I glanced around the place. It didn't take long for her to appear as her figure appeared next to me shortly thereafter. Ah, there she is. Her eyes alternated between Edward and me as she hung open-mouthed. Eventually, she began to announce the match's result. The look on her face never changed as she spoke. It was still filled with shock. And the winner of the match is White Reaper, officially dethroning the Blood Prince from his overlord position, and thereby becoming the new overlord. It wasn't long before her words deeply echoed throughout the whole arena. During a brief pause, the crowd and spectators digested the information before erupting into cheers. The stadium started shaking as the cheers grew louder. It was that loud. My attention briefly focused on Edward's direction before I turned around and moved toward the metallic gates in the distance. My job is done. I should get prepared for the big event that is coming soon. It was about time I returned home. Not bad. Duke Azanaka's face was tinged with a faint curl as he watched White Reaper's figure slowly exit the arena. The more he looked at him, the more pleased he became as he mumbled softly. He did not make the same mistake as the other one. Recalling what had happened with Sylvestar, the Duke shook his head with evident disappointment. Visit lworld.com for a better user experience. He was a good seedling. An obedient one. It was unfortunate that he had failed his mission. If only he hadn't been that useless. Well, this one isn't all too bad. While observing White Reaper from above, Duke Azaneka's lips opened enough to reveal a set of yellow teeth. At a first glance, he looks pretty obedient. Of course, that was merely on the outside. From that simple request he had asked, Duke Azanek had already come to the conclusion that he wasn't one that could be tamed. You wanted to challenge me? The smile on his face deepened as he slowly turned around. A pity, he muttered under his breath. What makes you willingly choose to kill yourself like that? Did he really believe that he could escape after seeing what he had done to Edward? In spite of the fact that he could have lived a few more years, he became greedy and decided to challenge him directly. What a terrible mistake on his part. A true pity that I have to kill him. Wiping his mouth with his hand, he proceeded to head out of the room. It was time for him to reap his rewards. It's time, don't you think? Coming back to my room, the first thing that greeted me was my other self. Glancing around the place, I didn't answer. It wasn't that I didn't want to, but the place was definitely under surveillance. Every one of my movements was being closely monitored, and given that I couldn't speak to him inside of my mind, I could only keep my mouth shut. Fully aware of my circumstances, he continued speaking. Your next match won't be like all the other matches that you've experienced. You should be aware of this. Meeting his line of sight, I subtly nodded my head. I know. Of course I knew. While my next opponent was just as skilled as Edward, he was actually coming at me with the intent of killing me, unlike Edward, who came with a completely different mindset. Furthermore, I was fully aware of the fact that he wasn't going to be honest with his rank, as he would only pretend to wear a suppressor. He had most likely planned on killing me during the fight. As if the Duke would ever let himself lose in front of his city. That would be the biggest humiliation in his life. I admit your skills are more than enough to fight against the Duke had he been suppressed. With everything that I've taught you over the past 4 months, this should be natural. Unfortunately. He paused mid-sentence and silence enveloped the room. I didn't need him to finish his sentence to understand what he was trying to imply. It was then that he continued. He won't be wearing a suppressor, and if that's the case, you stand no chance at beating him. Your only choice is to lend me your body. Staring in his direction, I didn't say anything. Rather, my thoughts were quite complicated. I still don't trust him. I knew that despite helping me over the course of 4 months, he had done it for his own benefit. He wasn't doing it for the sake of doing it. I understood this point as I took advantage of this. He also knew this. But there was only a problem. I was still unclear about his real motive. Was it just to kill the Demon King and get rid of his curse? But what exactly was this curse he was talking about? Was it perhaps the fact that time would repeatedly loop for him, or was it something else? I wasn't sure. Whenever I tried asking him, he would always keep his lips tied. His silence seemed forced. It felt as though someone or something was stopping him from saying anything. Were they perhaps the weird chains? This was most likely the case. Regardless, putting all of these unanswered questions aside, I still didn't feel comfortable with the idea of him taking over my body. You're thinking too much. It'll be just like when you use Monarch's indifference. It won't make a difference. The moment he said those words, I cocked my head forward and gave him a stare. Back then I didn't know you were the one controlling me. Seemingly being able to understand my thoughts, he shrugged his shoulders. You still allowed me to control your body not too long ago when we were in that dungeon. What difference does it make now? Are you really that confident in defeating a Duke-ranked demon that could potentially use his power at any second without warning and kill you? As he stared deeply into my eyes, he paused for a brief moment before continuing. Let me tell you something. Regardless of how many times you want to die or how many times you die, you will never die. That is your fate. Drawing closer to me, his ice-cold eyes looked down at me. I'll repeat this again, I'm not interested in taking your body. But it is within my best interest that you don't die, and... Extending his hand, he pointed his finger toward my chest. It is within your best interest if you don't die. Like. Chains were being pulled inside a small cell, creating a loud rattling sound. Ugh. After awakening from his groggy state, Edward glanced toward the other side of the cell and saw a figure standing there. Blinking a couple of times to get a better look at the figure hiding beneath the shadows of the room, his eyes sharpened. Clenching his teeth, he hatefully spat. Duke Azanek. It's been a while since we've seen each other. A sinister voice replied back. It was none other than Duke Azanek, who smiled widely. You should already have an idea as to why I'm here. Edward's eyes narrowed. Of course he knew why he was here. It was the most obvious answer. You want to sign a demon contract with me? Why else would he still be alive if not for this reason? You're quick to catch on. The Duke stretched out his hand and materialized a thin piece of paper that glowed a faint purple hue. Flipping the paper around and gazing at its contents, he asked, I've heard that you've been missing your daughter quite a lot. Like, a strong chain-pulling sound echoed throughout the cell as Edward bared his teeth. In a fit of rage he shouted, Don't talk about my daughter. Whoa. Jokingly moving back, a teasing smile spread across Duke Azanaka's face as he raised both hands. How about you let me finish my sentence? I don't care. Edward hatefully spat as he glared his way. Duke Azanak ignored him and went straight to the point. If you sign this contract, you will be a free man. The moment those words escaped from the Duke's mouth, Edward stopped struggling. With an incredulous look on his face, he gazed in the Duke's direction. What did you just say? You heard me right the first time. With a flick of his fingers, the contract flew in Edward's direction before magically stopping right in front of him. I'll soon be fighting against White Reaper. By the time it takes for me to beat him, I want to know your answer. It was then that he turned around and proceeded to head out of the room, leaving no room for Edward to talk. Like, the door soon closed shut and silence enveloped the room. Gazing at the contract that was laying down on the ground, Edward's face pulled into a wry smile. Recalling the events of the day prior, the corner of his lips twitched. He really did me dirty. For him to have attacked right as he was about to finish his own attack. Couldn't he have at least made it seem so not one-sided? Ugh. Just thinking about the fight caused Edward's face to darken a little. He said he knew Amanda, right? Somehow, Edward suddenly felt an ominous premonition. He just couldn't explain what it was. Chapter 530. Hoo. My body rose and fell as I breathed in and out. With sweat trickling down my body, I slowly closed my eyes and continued doing the same motion. Alongside it, I made sure to carefully move the mana around my body. Are you ready? It was then that a voice echoed inside the room. I promptly ignored the voice. Lowering my body once more, I flexed my muscles and only stopped once my chest and nose touched the floor before moving. My movement was very slow. Slow to the point that my muscles started to sting with each movement. It was only after I completed the movement that I finally stood up. Taking a clean towel, I cleaned my body. Warms up done. Plike. Detaching 4 large bracelets from my arms, I put them away. Knock. It was exactly at this moment that I heard a knocking sound coming from the other side of the room. Overlord, get ready. Your match is about to begin. Okay. Massaging my shoulders, I leaned and stretched my neck. What's your choice? The same voice from before spoke. As I glanced in his direction, my eyes paused. Eventually, I nodded my head and mumbled. Okay. Good choice. A smile began to spread on my other self's face. I'm starting to think that this was part of his plans. I was honestly still strongly opposed to the idea of having him take over my body, but after taking everything into consideration and realizing that the Duke could use his true strength at any moment and kill me, I realized that I had no choice but to accept his offer. It sucks, but I'm still too inexperienced to face a Duke-ranked demon. Jolting me out of my thoughts, the door to the room opened up, revealing several figures standing behind. As soon as the door fully opened, one of the demons asked, Are you ready? Yes. Nodding my head, I took a step forward. Walking shoulder to shoulder with me was my other self. With the same emotionless expression, he muttered, Be sure to pay close attention to everything I do. I will show you the true depth of your strength. Without saying anything, I opened my mouth and softly mumbled, Monarch's indifference. In spite of the fact that he had only been defeated a week ago, Lightning Dragon could not believe what he was seeing. The Duke against White Reaper? Lightning Dragon was still having a hard time processing the information as he stepped onto one of the platforms overlooking the arena. He already had a hard time figuring out how he had been able to beat the current Overlord. He's strong, yes, but from what I've seen, the Overlord should still be a bit stronger even if his rank is suppressed. Thanks to his eyes, Lightning Dragon was able to somewhat gauge how strong an opponent someone was. Comparing White Reaper to the Blood Prince, there was still a bit of a gap between the two. For him to have won that easily, as expected of the person who beat me, he sure had many surprises up his sleeve, particularly with regards to his upcoming battle with the Duke, which took the whole arena and city by storm. For the first time in a very long time, The Duke was finally going to make an appearance. The arena couldn't have been any fuller as it was packed to the brim. It was at that moment. I'm sure everyone here has already heard of the event that's currently happening. The demoness finally made his appearance. The crowd instantly quieted down. As the demons eagerly gazed at the arena below, the only sound heard was their rough breathing. The atmosphere was heated, and all the demons wanted to do at the moment was catch a glimpse of the Duke. A supreme being whom the arena and city were under the watchful eye of. For him to finally make an appearance. All the demons couldn't contain their excitement. They wanted nothing else but to see him crush the current overlord, White Reaper. They didn't really have hard feelings against him. But he was the Duke. Of course they would root for him. Lightning Dragon's eyes squinted as he gazed at the audience. Their thoughts were so easy to read. It was at that moment. Please let us welcome the Duke. As the gates at the far end of the arena slowly opened, the demoness' crisp and pleasant voice echoed throughout the entire arena. From that point forward, everyone stopped breathing. A lustrous set of black hair, 2 large horns that protruded from the side of his forehead, and a presence that instantly overtook the entire arena. Duke Azanek stepped into the arena. His every movement attracted the attention of all spectators and demons alike. The calm echo of his footsteps resounded throughout the whole arena. It wasn't long before he stopped in the middle of the arena. There was a calm look on his face as he gazed toward the other end of the arena. A brief moment of silence was followed by loud cheers, which shook the entire arena. Duke Azanek. Beat him up. Those screaming for him at the top of their lungs sounded borderline fanatical. In spite of this, Duke Azanek appeared to be enjoying the cheers as he basked in them calmly. Soon, a faint curl began to spread across the Duke's face. Meanwhile, at the top of one of the platforms, the device. Lightning Dragon's eyes opened wide as he gazed at the device that the Duke was wearing. Channeling his mana toward his eyes, Lightning Dragon's eyes sharpened. It's not on. Lightning Dragon's eyes were special. Not only could they allow him to detect the general flow of mana in the air, but they could also allow him to track down the general flow of energy in the air. Whether it was mana, demonic energy or aura, he could see through it all. For him to not detect any energy coming out of the Duke's suppressor, he knew that it wasn't on. Upon realizing this, he came up with one conclusion. He's planning on killing him. The Duke was planning on killing White Reaper. Lightning Dragon's face changed completely once he learned of this as he pressed both hands on the window of the platform. Shit, I should have told him earlier. The main reason why Lightning Dragon never once chose to become the next overlord was that he knew from the very beginning that the matches were fixed. With his all-seeing eyes, this was only to be expected. Well, that and the fact that he was too lazy to even consider the idea of fighting over 100 weak contestants. If he wanted to escape, he could do it without the need to defeat the Duke, hence why he never saw the appeal. Furthermore, he already knew from the very moment that he had heard the rules that it was practically impossible to escape from the arena. I mean, what kind of Duke would ever put their reputation on the line in front of so many demons? As if they would ever let themselves loose. And on the other side of the arena we have his opponent. Someone whose rise could be described as nothing short of a miracle. Within a span of a single month, he managed to accomplish something that the contestants had never been able to accomplish in the past. And that is to fight against the current Duke. Welcome the current overlord, White Reaper. Like, the moment her words faded, the gates on the other side of the arena slowly opened up, revealing a familiar figure that everyone had seen in the past. But the moment he appeared, Lightning Dragon's face hardened. Opening and closing his mouth multiple times, a cold chill swept his body. What? When he raised his hand to touch his face, he felt a wet sensation. Unknowingly, his body started to tremble as he took a step back and mumbled. Who is he? That wasn't the White Reaper he had fought in the past. He was someone else. Someone much scarier. There was a familiar smell of blood and ashenness, a familiar sight, a familiar noise. Standing in the middle of the arena with Duke Azanek opposite me, I was able to feel all my senses. But I couldn't move my body. The source of this indictor, Allworld.com. Like I've promised, here is your match. Thank you. My mouth opened on its own. It was the other me controlling my body. The contestants, please get ready. The demoness' voice rang throughout the stadium. In response to her voice, my body moved a few steps back, stopping when I was about 10 meters away from Duke Azanok. It was then that a voice entered my head. Make sure you memorize everything that I'm about to do. From my mana flow to everything that I do. Don't miss anything. Without answering the voice, I sharpened my focus and made sure to feel every sensation that was currently happening within my body. From mana flow to muscle movements. Alternating her gaze between the Duke and me, the demoness asked. Are the two contestants ready? A heavy silence descended on the arena as the crowd stopped speaking. Taking note of this silence, the demoness soon lowered her hand and announced the beginning of the fight. You may fight. Immediately following her words, Duke Azanok disappeared. Watch carefully. At the same time, Duke Azanok's figure moved, and my hand instinctively moved toward the right side of my head. Time slowed for a brief moment as my other self activated Eyes of Kronos. He would speed up and slow down the effects of the skill in short bursts. This repeated 5 times before he deactivated the skill altogether. Time returned to its usual flow. Bang! With a loud banging sound echoing throughout the arena, my right palm began to hurt. How did he do that? Then from the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Duke Azanok. In the blink of an eye, his fist had already hurled toward my right temple. However, that wasn't what surprised me. What surprised me was how my other self was able to block such a fast attack. With the palm of his hand, he somehow managed to catch the fist. Not bad. I wasn't the only one surprised, as the Duke also seemed surprised. With a flap of his wings, his figure disappeared once again. With a casual glance, my other self took a step forward. He repeated the same thing he did in the past. Swish. At the exact moment he stepped forward, Duke Azanok's fist flew past. Once again missing. Turning around to glance in the Duke's way, my other self started to speak. If there's something that you've been underutilizing, it's The moment he was about to complete his sentence, I felt my torso twist and I threw my fist behind me. Bang. With a loud banging sound, I felt my fist connect to something. It took me a couple of seconds to realize what that something was. It was the Duke's head. Tilting slightly as a result of the force of my fist, his expression died with absolute shock as his eyes opened widely. This whole arena was in a state of pin-drop silence. In spite of that, my other self completed the sentence without a care in the world. Chip inside of your head.